We keep going back to the objective of creation. It's to achieve something, to achieve a level of perfection in ourselves and in the world. And as a result of that, we'll be worthy of the ultimate level of relationship with God. Since God is perfect on the absolute level, and he's the source of all goodness on the absolute level, the more you reflect his characteristics and you bring about perfection, you have relevance to that level of perfection. You understand? People try for the Olympics. You have to have a certain physical ability to even be considered. The person himself is malnourished. He has no energy. He's missing limbs. He's mentally incompetent. You understand? He has no relevance to that event or to succeed in that arena whatsoever. Now, let's say he has the potential, but he has to develop that. Take the potential, turn it into reality, to actualize that potential. How does he do it? Diet, exercise, training, be mentored by the expert, how to excel in that particular area of physical prowess. The Jew was endowed with a soul and a physicality, which is to facilitate and bring about, make the choices that if we make the right decisions and invest our lives appropriately, we achieve that level of ability, perfection. As a result of that, we're qualified to have relevance to what's perfect and good on the absolute level, which is God. But we said, you need the nourishment, you need the trainer, you need the mentor, you have to be advised, and you have to keep training. I remember when Johansson trained to be the heavyweight champion. He was in Grossinger's, and he trained 8-10 hours a day. He had pictures of him, if you remember, skipping rope, the way he skipped rope. Anything less than that, you can't go in the ring and fight as a heavyweight contender for the championship. You have no relevance to it. It's only if you go and you have the physique and you have the ability and the nourishment and the training and the mentoring, then you have a chance to win. What is the nourishment? What is the training? What gives us that ability to develop, to reflect a semblance of what's considered perfecting ourselves, to have relevance to God's perfection? God gave us mediums. Those mediums are called mitzvos, commandments. 248 positive commandments, and what we have to stay away from to maintain our spiritual stamina and our spiritual profile, not to get way down and have our spiritual systems short-circuited, malfunctioning. We can't cross those negative lines. And God gave us 365 lines that we can't cross. Those are the negative commandments and the subcategories. And the positive commandments, this 240 are general positive, but the subcategories of those positive categories, which continuously, if when we gauge, she'll ask me a question, why? Why this and not that? Same question you could ask me. an animal is able to process and digest certain types of foods, a human being cannot, because we have a different makeup. That's the physical makeup. A Jew has a different spiritual makeup. That spiritual makeup is dependent on the profile of that soul. As we mentioned many times, the Jewish soul, in terms of what it is different than the non-Jewish soul. It has other needs. Its purpose, its value is other than what the Gentile is. At Sinai, the Gentile rejected what the offer that God made to it. All the nations, the Jew embraced it. We accepted it unequivocally, which was a confirmation on the essence of what the Jew is. It's because we descend from Abraham, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the patriarchs, where they developed that potential. And now Sinai was what we call ready for real time now. We've reached a maturation point. Now we're ready to actually to put it into motion, to function and live within the context of those commandments, the positive and negative commandments. It's only that. It's only the tefillin. And the tefillin, if they don't meet the criteria that God sets, or that they look like tefillin and seem to be tefillin, they're not tefillin. So what it's meant to affect, it's not going to affect. Kosher species, if they're not prepared as prescribed by the Torah, it's not kosher. Kosher species need ritual slaughter. The ritual slaughterer has to meet certain prerequisites to be qualified to be the ritual slaughter, more than just being knowledgeable. The animal, if it has any defect, although it's a kosher species, is not kosher. So it has to be examined. But all this only has relevance to the Jew because it's directly relating to the spiritual makeup of the Jew. So it's either detrimental to its spirituality or it's beneficial and it advances the spirituality. Anybody says it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. As I mentioned, the Talmud tells us that in ancient days, all homes had cats. What they call the feline. Cats. I'm talking about the Kohen cats, right? The cats. And why? Because in the olden days, every community had venomous snakes. And a cat has a certain enzyme in its digestive system. When it eats, it kills the snake and it digests the venom. Its enzymes neutralize that venom and the cat doesn't die. Any other species that eats that venomous snake will die from that venom, from that poison. So you ask a question, why the cat this and that other species not? It's just a reality. This cat has the enzyme, this species, the other species doesn't have the enzyme. Certain animals live on grass because kosher species have four stomachs. You need those four stomachs to be able to process and digest that food. And that's why they chew the cud. It's part of chewing cud. If it doesn't have the four stomachs, it cannot. And that's why during the war, when Jews, they were starving, they ate grass. They had tremendous pain, excruciating pain, because even though it digested, but it was with almost impossible difficulty, it was digested, because the body couldn't process it. The Jewish soul needs a certain kind of nourishment, which has no relevance to the non-Jewish soul. But why? Why this and not that? Only God knows. Because only God knows our spiritual makeup. So therefore he prescribed the spiritual nourishment, the infusions, to allow us to advance. And he prohibited the negatives, which are transgressions, because it causes us to regress and creates destruction within the spiritual realm. That's the understanding. But that's the objective. One generates good, besides personal perfection. One generates negative, which represents evil. Eating not kosher is not evil. It's not, but it's a transgression. Because it doesn't advance the good, automatically, it creates a vacuum. If there's vacuum, therefore there's place for evil. I once mentioned the name of Reb Chaim Volozhiner. In Hebrew, the word for desecration of God's name. Person desecrates God forbid God's name. It's called Chilul Hashem. That's how in Hebrew you say a desecration of God's name. Chilul Hashem. A sanctification of God's name is called Kiddush Hashem. Sanctification of God's name. Why is it called Chilul Hashem? In Hebrew, the word for vacuum is halal. Halal, that's a vacuum. Literally means a hole. When we say the blessing after we do our bodily functions, we say God created the human being with oracles, with cavities within the body. Chalulim, chalulim. Cholo means openings, crevices, oracles. It means that a hole, vacuum. When the Jew misbehaves and desecrates holiness, you know what that causes? It causes God to retreat from this existence. He vacates this existence. Vacating this existence creates the vacuum. If he's here, there's no vacuum. Everything is filled in and permeated with his presence. But if we misbehave and we cross certain lines, that causes him to retreat, to vacate. What happens when God vacates? What's left? It's called vacuum. Therefore, it's called Chilul Hashem. Because the person misbehaved to such an extreme level, God's vacating existence is called, it's God has vacated. It's God's leaving created that vacuum. When you have that vacuum, everything starts breaking down, deteriorating, and that's what that actually generates and empowers evil. Where God is, there's no evil. Evil is only a result of his absence, but he's fully here, involved, there's no room for evil. So that act, which was the chilul, which desecrated God, which caused him to retreat, brings about the greatest degree of vacuum. The greater degree of vacuum, the greater possibility that consequence has a more intense level of evil. Because God vacated to a greater degree. You know, if you have ever saw the pictures of when they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima or Nagasaki, when they dropped that atom bomb, the crater it created, when that exploded, and everything was, the level of heat was so intense, the crater, I don't know how deep it was and how wide it was, everything was totally vaporized due to that intensity of that atomic explosion. Nothing could exist. When God leaves, God forbid, the crater is so deep and wide, and everything just falls apart. Everything deteriorates. Everything malfunctions. All the weeds start growing. It's like when you sap the earth of nutrients, all of a sudden, everything but value grows there. Weeds, thistles, briars, thorn bushes. Nothing else. That's Chilul Hashem. God's vacating the location is due to his name being desecrated. So the Jew, what is his purpose? Not to allow vacuum. There should not be vacuum in this existence. God's intent of creation, he should exist within this existence, as would have been before the sin of Adam. God existed on the terrestrial level. His presence was felt on the terrestrial level. Because Adam sinned, God transcended. he retreated, he retracted from this location. Because the evil of that action didn't allow God to remain here. Of course, everything is God's choice. Because God says the day that you will eat, you become subject to death. Death is the ultimate level of vacuum. That's void. Death is void. After death is deterioration, decomposition. Eventually, it breaks down to nothing, turns to dust. That's what it is. So we speak about different systems God created. There's a system which generates perfection, infusion, which brings about, takes potential to allow the potential to be actualized in the most positive. But he created a system that if you engage in other things, it causes a void, a vacuum, which allows this deterioration to take place, which is called evil. That's the reality of the world. What about the person personally? We speak about reward and punishment in this world and the world to come. A person lives responsibly in the physical sense. You're healthy. You eat responsibly. You sleep responsibly. You work responsibly. Your mind is active. You're a fully functional person. You do not attend to the basic needs of what a human being needs. Person has, his health starts reclining, starts deteriorating. Same thing. If the Jew lives as he should in this world, and the physicality of the world is used to facilitate what it was meant to facilitate, then what is it? That advances the material, the blessing. And as I always say, there's no check that God can't write. We do the right thing. God says, you just keep your eye on the ball. As we say, keep your eye on the road. I'll give you the directions. I'll keep whispering in your ear. It's interesting. Today we have what we call Waze when we travel. People travel. Some people, their cars in the garage since who knows when, time immemorial. They don't need Waze. But if you travel Waze, so normally you have the driver, a husband, and you had a wife. So you're driving at nighttime. So the wife had the directions on the paper or the triptych from AAA. And she has to tell the husband exactly when you get to the streets, where to go, how to navigate. So you have two people involved in arriving at the destination. Because if the driver has to keep looking at the paper, there's a chance you could get into an accident. God says, no, I'm going to make it easy for you. You got this thing called Waze, and it talks. So the person sits next to the driver can have a Torah book. He could study without distraction. He doesn't have to assess the driver in driving the car. No distraction. God makes it easy. The driver himself, he could turn on some kind of podcast, a Torah podcast. Not too deep, so it's not distracting him. While he drives, he can learn. And one time, you can only study from a book, or you have to talk to somebody else. But it's not really advisable to talk to somebody while you're driving if you get involved in an intense discussion. God makes it easy. You have whatever it is, at one time, a CD, a tape. Today you have whatever it's called, and you just hook it in. You can listen for 1,000 hours worth of Torah classes while you're driving, while you're sleeping, while every moment of your life. God makes it easy. But some people say, I have a conflict. Got to be at that appointment. Have no time to listen. Got to listen to something else. Goes to this, and we have every excuse under the sun. You understand? You may have every excuse. The question, does it hold water? There'll be a day where they'll ask, why didn't you? Had the time. You'll offer your excuse. They say, sorry, Sonny, it doesn't hold water. As they say, you're not going to buy time with that. It's not going to work. So people have to be truthful to themselves. But you can only be truthful to yourself if you understand and appreciate the value of opportunity. Person doesn't appreciate the value of opportunity, we just gloss over it, let it just slip through our fingers. But the more we understand it, could appreciate the value of opportunity, we're not letting it go so quickly. If a person has an investment and it's clear the return is 10,000 times the investment, and what you can be able to do with that to enrich your life and make life less complicated, nothing's going to distract you from that opportunity. It's only because you appreciate the reality, if it is a reality, of what that investment is and what the value of money is. If you appreciate the value of spiritual advancement, what eternity is, although it's not something we've ever experienced. But the more we live a life of spirituality, it gives us a greater capacity to take something which is totally abstract and have a sense of what it is, although we haven't experienced it yet. You understand? Unless you taste the chocolate cake, you'll never know what chocolate tastes like. Or unless I give you, it's similar to something else. We speak about the world to come. It's not similar to anything. We live as different beings. The only way you could relate to what that is, as abstract it is, if you live a life that you become spiritualized, God gives you a sense that you're able to have a sense of what that is, to value that. So the more we advance and the more we become spiritualized, we have a greater capacity to appreciate what that is. I'd once said towards the end of the Sefer Devarim, Deuteronomy, we speak about in the fourth year of the sabbatical cycle, one gives away all the tithes that he haven't given away throughout the years. The tithe that goes to the Kohen, the tithe that goes to the Levi, the tithe that goes to the poor, the tithe that you have to take to Jerusalem to eat, which could only be eaten in Jerusalem, so on and so forth. And after we distribute the bikurim, the new fruits, the new grain that's given to the Kohen, we say to Hashem, look down from your heavenly abode and bless us. Bless you, Jewish people. Why? Because we've done what you commanded us. We've made the recipients of these people happy. The Kohen has no share in the land. The poor man doesn't have very much. So when he receives the 10%, the poor man, the Levi, the Kohen, and all these different people, you've made them very happy. When a person has very little, he has a little more than very little, he makes them very happy. But we say much more than that. We said, not only did we make them happy, we were happy to give it away. You understand? Person has profit, and he gives away 50% of his profit. The one who receives it, definitely he's happy. The one who gives it away, not so simple. But the person says, not only did I make them happy, I was happy. How could you be happy to give away such percentages of your profit? So Rashi over there cites the Midrash. When we say, we've done ours, now you do yours. We've done ours because you said that if we follow your statutes, you will give us bounty, unlimited bounty. So when we gave away the tithes, we fulfilled your statute. So I asked the question, if you remember in the portion of B'chukosai, when we discussed that, what does it mean? I followed your statutes. I've toiled in your Torah. I've toiled, not I studied, I've toiled. That the Torah was primary and everything else was secondary. And I was willing to sacrifice. God says the bounty will be unlimited. So what I said was, if a person dedicates his life and you study at that level, where you toil, automatically you develop an understanding of the value of spirituality. So, I mean, if I could say that not only did I make the recipients happy, but I was happy to give away those kinds of potential, those kinds of percentages, you know what that says? You've spiritualized yourself sufficiently that have a capacity to appreciate that giving away, like you made an investment, which you can have a 10,000 time return on your money. But you only have that appreciation that you could be rejoiced for giving it away only if you've been spiritualized to that degree. How does that come about? You have to toil. It's not only studying Torah. You've toiled. When you toil for Torah means it's this is first and foremost. When you live a life where the Torah and the mitzvah is first and foremost, then you have a capacity to appreciate the value. The giving away is, you're actually the beneficiary. You're giving away a pittance, but the return is something which is phenomenal. King Solomon in Proverbs says, Soni matonis yechia. The one who despises gifts, doesn't accept gifts, will live. Why? He say, something, because when you take a gift, there's a certain degree of beholdenness to the one who gives you the gift. So if you want to be fair and clear, when nobody has control over you, or you don't feel indebted, better don't take it. Don't take gifts. You don't take gifts, you owe it to no one. You live as a free agent. You're a free spirit. The moment you take a gift to someone, he believes he owns you to a degree. Or in your own mind, because of the indebtedness, you're bound to that person. Therefore, the one who despises gifts, he will live. That's the simple understanding. Malbim, who's a commentator on Tanakh, writes, God is always on the giving end, never on the taking end. So if you want to assume God's profile, don't accept gifts. Because just as God is a giver and never a taker, you should always be on the giving end, not the taking end. So that's part of creating a commonality with God. Similar, as we're saying, that's part of the spiritualization of the Jew. As God is always on the outtake, not the intake, you should be always on the giving end, not on the receiving end. And that itself creates a capacity which reflects God's capacity, similar profile, and therefore allows you to cleave to him. That's part of the spiritualization. That's God's profile. He's a giver, he's never a taker. Therefore, Soni matonis yichya. The one who despises gifts, he will live. There's a known fact, the Chafetz Chaim, when he published his magnum opus on Shulchan Aruch, on the Code of Laws, known as Mishnah Berurah, he sold the volumes. And somebody once came to visit him. In those days, if you buy a volume of Mishnah Berurah, his compilation on the Code of Laws, let's say you pay $1. In those days, we're talking about 1923, $1, which was considered a lot. There was a certain Jew from Merrill who visited the Chafetz Chaim. His name was Myers, American Jew. And he goes to Chafetz Chaim, and he was an observant Jew. And he asked the Chafetz Chaim, he'd like to buy his book that he authored, his commentary, his compilation. And he gave the Chafetz Chaim a $100 bill. It was a lot of money. And he was privileged to give the Chafetz Chaim. When he gave it, he felt there's no better investment to give to such a holy man. Chafetz Chaim would not accept it under any circumstance. He says, I'm sorry, you pay me for the book. It's $1. You don't pay 1 cent more than $1. You know what you can do with $100 in 1923? The buying power of that, not even consideration. We think mitzvah, what we do? We give charity. God also gives charity, but he gives what he has. Charity, give what you have. I don't have to compromise myself to give charity. You have, God gives you, you have, you give. But to receive from others, to be on the taking end, under no circumstance. I'm a self-earner, I earned it. If I didn't earn it, I'm not interested in having it. But again, that's part of the spiritual profile. That's creating a sense of something which is so removed from our existence, but despite it being removed, God gives you the ability to have a sense of its value, despite the fact that it's not part of the physical realm. The meditation is not so simple. People could meditate and they go like into a different realm, and they could actually focus on things and they sense things which we can't sense unless you go into that meditative state. What's the reason? Because even when we're not in a meditative state, the many undercurrents, the brain, the many undercurrents that are going on, even though your consciousness is not engaged in whatever that is. But if you're able to extricate yourself and go into this meditative state, there's a certain serenity and calmness that now the brain has senses and is able to sense things which otherwise you can't sense. That's the way Rabbeinu Bachya writes, when a person sleeps, he dreams. What do we dream when we sleep? What do we dream when we're awake? And the Talmud tells us that when one dreams, a dream could be truth. So why when we sleep, we could come upon these truths, and when we're awake, we don't? So he explains, when the body functions and it's fully, all the systems are engaged, there's a lot of static. And that static doesn't allow the person to sense many things that you're able to sense that are going around himself. When you sleep, you're in a dormant state. The systems of the body are what really pretty much dormant. They're not high activity. Not being engaged high activity, you're able to sense many things that in the wake state you can't sense. So you see the things that it's unrelated to your senses. It's just the reality, the way God created a human being, we're able to sense things, although they're not tangible. It's not subject to smell or taste, which is also not tangible, but it's detectable. It's the same thing. When you spiritualize yourself through doing mitzvos on a qualitative level, with a dedication, with a subservience, with a humility, the body itself assumes another level of persona, another level of capacity. And in that capacity, you can appreciate certain things. An example, you have two Jews, not much of an observant background. And they visit, first time in Yerushalayim, or Jerusalem, and they visit the Wailing Wall, what it used to be called, the Western Wall, Kosa Maravi. This is the remnant of the temple, the second temple. And one Jew goes and he picks up one of these cardboard yarmulkes that they give out, that all these Orientals wear, when they go down with their cameras around their necks, talking Chinese or Japanese. And you also put on one, except you don't look, your eyes are not slanted. And you go up to the wall and you realize this is where it was at one time. These two secular Jews, one Jew was touched, he just melts, he breaks down crying. The other Jew says, his friend, Jim, what's happened to you? Since when do you become so superstitious? What are you crying about? One Jew was touched, the other Jew is not touched. What's going on? Why is one Jew touched, the other one's not touched? And they're just as emotionally stable. They have a similar emotional makeup, the two of them. One's touched. One being touched, that means he has a gift. God gifted him with the ability to be touched. The other person is what we call, he's stone-hearted. He's totally a physical person. Physical person is not touched. But a person who has some relevance to spirituality, even though it has nothing to do with your actions, just the reality, you can be touched. That's the difference between these two people. It's not explainable, but it's a reality. And that being touched can lead to many special things, to many initiatives, whether it's charity, whether it's studying, whether it's seeking out information, creates a curiosity, an interest. The other person has no interest. He'll talk about how his friend became a fanatic when he came to the wall. Somehow he had an event. And that event caused him, his brain to malfunction. That's where the other person sees it. The other man looks at him and says, you got it wrong. I didn't malfunction. I have a sense of what it is. I don't know why, but I do. And that's the difference.